Over the course of history, humans have eaten around 6,000 different plant species. Today, almost the entire world survives on a tiny handful of them. Just 3 cereals, wheat, rice, and corn, supply roughly half of all the calories that humanity eats. Add a fourth, the soybean, and you have the foundation that nearly everything else on your plate is built on. Which means the survival of 8 billion people rests on an astonishingly narrow base, far narrower than most people ever realize. And as we're about to see, that base is a lot more fragile than it looks. In the next few minutes, you'll understand 3 things. How the human race quietly narrowed its entire food supply down to just a few key crops. Why those specific crops, out of thousands of possible options, ended up ruling the world. And why the very thing that makes them so efficient also makes them one of the biggest hidden risks to global stability. This is a story about triumph and fragility at the same time. And by the end, you'll never look at a field of wheat or a plate of rice the same way again. Let's start by meeting the crops that feed the planet. First is wheat, the backbone of bread, pasta, and noodles across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and much of the Americas. It grows in cool, temperate climates and it stores for years, which is exactly what made it the food that powered the first cities. Wheat is planted on more land than any other food crop on Earth, and its gluten protein is what lets dough stretch and trap air, giving us everything from fluffy bread to chewy noodles. Second is rice, the daily staple for more than half the world's population. It's grown in flooded paddies that demand enormous amounts of water and labor, and in parts of Asia, rice alone can provide up to 80% of a person's calories. Third is corn, also called maize, and it may be the most versatile crop ever domesticated. We eat it directly, but far more of it becomes animal feed, cooking oil, sweetener, starch, and even fuel for cars. Most of the corn grown in a country like the United States isn't the sweet corn you picture. It's field corn destined for livestock and industry. And fourth is the soybean, the quiet giant. You rarely eat one whole, but it is the protein and oil engine behind modern meat and dairy. Roughly 3/4 of the world's soy is fed to animals, which means it silently underpins nearly every burger, egg, and glass of milk on Earth. Together, these 4 crops form the load-bearing walls of the entire global food system. So here's the first real question. Humans have eaten 6,000 kinds of plants over our history. Why did we end up betting almost everything on just a few? The answer is that not all plants are created equal, at least not when it comes to feeding entire civilizations. A true staple crop has to do several hard things at once. It has to pack a lot of calories into a small package, so people can actually get enough energy to live. It has to yield heavily, producing far more food than the seed and effort you put into it. It has to store for months or even years without rotting, so a single harvest can carry a whole population through winter and through lean times. And it has to travel, surviving long journeys to distant cities and across oceans. Cereals like wheat, rice, and corn hit every single one of those targets. Their dry, hard grains are dense with calories, they store almost indefinitely in a silo, and they can be shipped anywhere on the planet. Soybeans add the missing pieces, concentrated protein and oil, in an equally storable and shippable form. Thousands of other edible plants are delicious or nutritious, but they bruise, they spoil within days, they yield too little, or they simply cannot be stored at scale. In the brutal arithmetic of feeding billions, a handful of crops won not by accident, but because they were uniquely, almost perfectly good at the job. It's worth pausing on just how lopsided this is. Of those roughly 6,000 species we have eaten, the world today leans heavily on only about 9 of them, and just 3 provide half of all our calories. An entire planet's diet balanced on a base you could almost count on one hand. There's also a deep historical reason these crops dominate. They got a massive head start, measured in thousands of years. Wheat and barley were first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East over 10,000 years ago. Rice was tamed in Asia, and corn was patiently bred from a scrawny wild grass called teosinte in Mexico across thousands of years of careful selection. Generation after generation, farmers saved seeds from their best plants, slowly transforming wild grasses into high-yield food machines that would be almost unrecognizable to their ancestors. By the time modern science arrived, humanity had already poured 100 centuries of improvement into these specific crops. Switching to a brand new staple from scratch would mean throwing away that entire head start and beginning the whole process over again. A wild plant does not become a reliable crop in a decade or even a century. It takes the patient work of hundreds of human generations. So instead of replacing them, we did the opposite. We doubled down and made them even more productive. That doubling down has a name: the Green Revolution. In the middle of the 20th century, an American scientist named Norman Borlaug developed new varieties of wheat that quite literally changed the course of history. His semi-dwarf wheat grew on short, sturdy stalks that could carry heavy heads of grain without toppling over, and it responded dramatically to fertilizer and irrigation. Yields didn't just rise, they exploded, sometimes doubling or tripling. Similar breakthroughs soon followed in rice and corn. Countries that had been staring down mass famine, like India and Mexico, suddenly found themselves growing more food than ever before. Borlaug's work is credited with saving as many as 1 billion people from starvation, and it earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. Consider the scale of what that made possible. The world's population has roughly doubled since then, climbing past 8 billion, and yet we have largely managed to feed it. Without those higher yields, we would have had to plow under vast areas of forest and wild land just to keep pace. So in a strange way, a few crops grown intensively actually spared a great deal of nature. But the Green Revolution did something else too, something with a hidden cost. By spreading a small number of super-productive varieties across the entire planet, it made the world's fields more genetically identical than they had ever been in all of human history. And that sameness quietly planted the seed of a very different kind of problem. Here's the twist that most people never think about. The incredible efficiency of modern farming comes directly from uniformity. To harvest a field with giant machines and get predictable, reliable results, farmers plant enormous areas with genetically near-identical plants. A single vast field can be millions of copies of essentially the same organism, with the same strengths and, crucially, the same weaknesses. That uniformity is fantastic for yield, and it is genuinely terrifying for security. Because if one pest or one disease ever figures out how to attack that specific plant, there is very little to stop it. Every plant in the field can fall to the same enemy, and this is not some far-fetched hypothetical. It has already happened over and over again throughout history. In the 1840s, Ireland had come to depend almost entirely on a single variety of potato. When a water mold arrived that this potato had no defense against, the crop simply rotted in the ground across the whole country, and roughly 1 million people starved to death, while 1 million more fled. A century ago, the banana that most of the Western world ate was a variety called the Gros Michel. A soil fungus known as Panama disease swept through the plantations and wiped it out commercially, forcing the entire industry to switch to a different type, the Cavendish, which is the banana you almost certainly eat today. And in 1970, a leaf blight tore through the American corn belt and destroyed roughly 15% of the entire United States corn crop in a single season, precisely because so much of that corn shared one hidden genetic vulnerability. Those were warnings from the past, but the danger is very much alive today. Take that same banana story. The Cavendish that replaced the Gros Michel is now being hunted by a new strain of Panama disease called tropical racefort, which is spreading between banana-growing regions around the world. And so far there is no easy, resistant replacement waiting in the wings. History is rhyming in real time. The same threat hangs over our staple grains. In 1998, a dangerous new strain of wheat stem rust, a fast-moving fungus, was discovered in Uganda and given the name UG99. What made it so alarming is that around 90% of all the wheat varieties grown worldwide had no resistance to it. And stem rust can destroy up to 70 or even 100% of an infected crop. Norman Borlaug himself, near the end of his life, sounded the alarm, warning that this single fungus could threaten the wheat supply of the entire planet. Scientists have been locked in a quiet, constant race ever since, breeding new resistant varieties and trying to stay one step ahead before the disease spreads out of Africa and the Middle East. And on top of disease, there is the climate. Our 4 crops are grown in a surprisingly small number of key regions, the great breadbaskets of the world. When severe heat waves, droughts, or floods strike those specific regions, and climate change is making that more likely, they don't just hurt one country. They can ripple through the entire global food supply all at once. A single hot, dry summer striking 2 or 3 major breadbaskets in the same year is one of the quiet nightmares that keeps food security experts awake. And then there is the human threat. Because production is so concentrated in a handful of places, a small number of countries end up feeding much of the world, and that turns food into raw geopolitics. Consider what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Before the war, Ukraine and Russia together supplied roughly 1/3 of the entire world's wheat exports, along with huge shares of corn and cooking oil. Russia is also one of the world's largest exporters of the fertilizers that modern farming completely depends on. So the same conflict threatened not just this year's bread, but the raw ingredients for next year's harvest almost everywhere. Ukraine alone was feeding well over 125 countries. Some nations depended on it for the overwhelming majority of their wheat, and around 40% of the wheat used by the world's single largest food aid program came from Ukraine. When the Black Sea ports were suddenly blockaded, global wheat prices spiked, and countries thousands of miles away from any fighting abruptly found themselves staring at a food crisis. That is the real danger of a narrow food base. A war, a bad harvest, or a single disease in one key region can send hunger and instability rippling across entire continents that had absolutely nothing to do with the original problem. So what can we actually do about all of this? The answer, in a word, is diversity, deliberately rebuilding some of the variety that we gave up in the rush for efficiency. Around the world, scientists now store hundreds of thousands of different seed varieties in secure gene banks. The most famous is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, buried deep inside a frozen mountain in the Arctic, holding well over 1 million seed samples as a backup copy of the planet's crop diversity in case the worst ever happens. Plant breeders are constantly developing new, disease-resistant versions of our staples, working to stay ahead of threats like UG99 and tropical race 4. That work quietly succeeds far more often than it ever makes the news. New rust-resistant wheat lines, for instance, have been rolled out across vulnerable regions before the disease could cause the catastrophe Borlaug feared. And there is a growing global push to revive so-called orphan crops, hardy and nutritious plants like millet, sorghum, cassava, and teff that were shoved aside during the Green Revolution but can thrive in heat and drought where our Big Four struggle. Spreading our dependence across more crops and more regions is, in a very real sense, an insurance policy for the whole of civilization. So here is the strange truth about how the world actually eats. 4 crops, wheat, rice, corn, and soybeans, are one of humanity's single greatest achievements, a stunning triumph of efficiency that manages to feed 8 billion people every single day. But that very same narrowness is also our greatest vulnerability, because a food system built on just a few plants can fail on just a few plants. The exact thing that feeds us so cheaply and so reliably is the thing that could, one day, fail us all at once. And that is why the smartest thing we can do for the future of food may simply be to make our dinner plates a little less predictable. Subscribe for more of the hidden systems behind the food you eat and the world you live in.